Okay, let's go. Number 1. The San Clemente Mithraeum. The year is 1857, and a Dominican friar named Joseph Maluli has just broken through the floor of a medieval church in Rome. He expected foundations, perhaps Roman brick. What he found instead was another church, an entire basilica, intact, its frescoed walls still vivid with color from the 4th century, its columns standing as if the congregation had stepped out 1,000 years ago and simply never returned. He kept digging. Below the church, a corridor. Below the corridor, a cave. And inside the cave, carved into stone, an altar showing a man in a Persian cap driving a knife into the neck of a bull while a serpent drank the blood from below. Maluli had found a Mithraeum, a secret temple of the mystery cult of Mithras, one of the most powerful religions in the ancient Roman world, buried deliberately beneath a Catholic basilica dedicated to Saint Clement, the third Pope of Rome. 3 complete worlds, stacked on top of each other. 3 civilizations, each one built on the deliberate erasure of the last. The current Basilica of San Clemente dates to 1108 AD. Below it, sealed under rubble and forgotten for nearly 1,000 years, sits a 4th century church, one of Rome's earliest Christian structures. Beneath that, a 1st century Roman apartment complex with rooms large enough to house 100 families. And beneath that, accessed through a narrow corridor where an underground stream still runs, the Mithraeum, a ritual chamber roughly the size of a tennis court, carved into the living rock. The cult of Mithras was the primary religious rival to early Christianity in the Roman Empire. Both promised salvation. Both practiced ritual communal meals. Both emphasized rebirth and the conquest of death through sacrifice. The similarities were so precise that early Christian writers, including Justin Martyr, writing in the 2nd century, accused the Mithraists of deliberately copying Christ as a demonic parody of the true faith. The Mithraeum at San Clemente dates to the late 1st or early 2nd century AD. Its altar, its stone benches where initiates sat for communal meals, and its tauroctony, the bull-slaying relief that is the central sacred image of Mithraic worship, survive intact beneath the Christian church that was built directly over it, around 380 AD. The same decade, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. The same decade, the old gods were given their final notice. Archaeologist Letizia Ermini Pani documented the site's 3-phase stratigraphy in 1975, confirming the deliberate sequence of religious replacement. The flooding of the Mithraeum by redirected water before the Christian church was constructed above, it appears to have been intentional. Someone redirected the flow. The sacred space was filled with water, rendered permanently unusable, and the new religion's temple was raised directly overhead. The mainstream explanation is religious triumph. As Christianity gained imperial endorsement under Theodosius I, Mithraic temples across the empire were closed, converted, or demolished. The San Clemente sequence simply reflects this transition. The underground stream is a geological feature of the Capitoline Hill, not a weapon. The layering is administrative, not conspiratorial. New Rome was built on Old Rome. This is how cities work. But the deliberateness of what happened here is difficult to explain as coincidence. Someone went to the effort of redirecting water specifically into the Mithraeum, not into the apartment building beside it, not into the adjacent corridors, but into the cult chamber. The flooding was targeted, and the construction of the Christian basilica directly overhead was not incidental. It was a statement, made in stone and mortar, that one god had been placed permanently beneath the other. What was preserved in the flooding, sealed within the underground stream, is a different question. The water still runs beneath the site today, flowing through rooms that have not been opened since the 4th century. Current access to the Mithraeum requires advance booking through the Dominican friars who still manage the site. Photography is restricted in the lower levels. Certain chambers at the deepest stratum, beyond the altar room, remain sealed by both structural and ecclesiastical authority. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted in 2008 by a British School at Rome team, led by Thea Ravasi, indicated additional chambers extending beyond the excavated boundaries, oriented toward the underground water source below. What they contain has not been determined because no one has been permitted to dig further. There is a moment when you descend through San Clemente, through the medieval nave, through the 4th century frescoes, into the Mithraeum, when you understand that religion is not progress. It is geology. Each faith buried the last, built its altars over the rubble, sang its hymns above the sealed doors. And beneath the sealed doors, the water still runs, moving through chambers no living person has entered, past stone carvings of a god that no one prays to anymore. What is in the chambers beyond the Mithraeum that remains sealed by Vatican authority? Why was the flooding of the cult space targeted so precisely if this was simply urban renewal? And what did early Christians fear about what the Mithraeum contained that it required permanent inundation rather than simple demolition? Number 2. The Vatican Necropolis. In 1939, Pope Pius XII ordered workers to lower the floor of the grotto beneath St. Peter's Basilica to create room for a new papal tomb. They expected foundations. What they found instead, below the foundations of Constantine's original 4th century basilica, was a city of the dead, an entire Roman necropolis intact, mapped, painted lying directly beneath the holiest building in Catholicism. The mausoleums were decorated with Neptune, Bacchus, Apollo, and sea creatures rendered in mosaic. The Latin epitaphs commemorated people who had worshipped Jupiter and Mars. A pagan Roman graveyard, 1st century to 4th century, extended without interruption directly under the altar of St. Peter. The excavation ran from 1940 to 1950, conducted by 4 Vatican archaeologists, now called the Sempitrini. What they documented was a street of tombs running east to west beneath the basilica, ranging from modest brick chambers to elaborate marble-clad family vaults. None of it was Christian, and at the center of the excavation, beneath a niche in a wall painted red and dated to approximately 160 AD, they found what they were not officially looking for. A deposit of bones, wrapped in purple and gold fabric, tucked into a recess behind a grid of graffiti, scratched into the plaster over generations. Vatican archaeologist Margherita Garducci spent years analyzing those graffiti, published her findings in 1965, and concluded that the Greek letters Phi and Chi, scratched into the red wall, were an abbreviated reference to the name Peter. The bones were subsequently analyzed. They belonged to a robust male in his 60s. Pope Paul VI announced in 1968 that the relics of St. Peter had been identified with reasonable certainty. That announcement has never been rescinded. The mainstream Catholic position is that the excavation confirmed tradition. From the 2nd century onward, Christian sources consistently placed Peter's grave on the Vatican Hill, a location Nero had used as an execution ground, where Tacitus reported a large number of Christians were killed around 64 AD. Constantine chose the Vatican Hill for his basilica because tradition pointed to Peter's grave there. The scavi found exactly what tradition described. But another Vatican archaeologist on the same excavation team disagreed. Antonio Ferrua published his own analysis of Garducci's letter identification and called it speculative at best. The graffiti on the red wall is fragmentary, damaged, and has been read differently by multiple independent scholars. The Vatican has not permitted independent radiocarbon dating of the bones since the 1960s analysis. The last time outside researchers had unmediated access to the evidence, they disputed the conclusion. The Vatican's response was to restrict the evidence, and beneath the accessible portions of the scavi, ground-penetrating radar conducted in the 1990s detected additional chambers extending south and west of the current excavated boundary. These chambers are oriented toward the precise point where Constantine's engineers would have been forced to demolish existing structures in order to align the basilica's high altar with the claimed tomb site. They have not been excavated. The Vatican has stated no plans to open them. Access to the Vatican Necropolis today requires a written application to the Fabbrica di San Pietro, submitted 6 to 8 weeks in advance. No more than 250 people are admitted per day. Number 1. Photography is restricted. The application form requests the visitor's purpose. The grotto that contains the most contested set of bones in Christianity is more difficult to enter than most government archives. The pagan Romans buried in the necropolis surrounding the claimed tomb of the first pope were not anomalies. They were the neighborhood. Whatever community buried its dead on the Vatican Hill in the 1st century included people who worshipped entirely different gods and made no distinction between their graves and those of their neighbors. If Peter is buried here, he rests in a pagan cemetery. If he is not buried here, The bones in the red wall niche are unidentified remains in purple and gold fabric from a population that has no other documented connection to the early church. What is in the sealed chambers south of the current Scavi boundary, oriented toward the altar alignment Constantine's engineers constructed? Why has the Vatican not permitted independent scientific dating of the claimed Peter relics in over 50 years? What religious structures preceded the pagan necropolis on the Vatican Hill? And if those bones belong to the third Pope of Rome, why is he buried in a graveyard full of people who prayed to Neptune? Number 3. The Rosslyn Vault. In 1446, William Sinclair, the first Earl of Orkney, and a man whose family had served as hereditary custodians of Scottish Freemasonry for generations, began construction on a small collegiate chapel in Midlothian. He died before it was finished. His son completed it in 1486. The chapel that resulted is covered, floor to ceiling, pillar to arch to keystone, with carved stonework of extraordinary density, roses, stars, angels, wheat stalks, green men with vegetation growing from their mouths, geometric interlocking patterns whose proportions some researchers argue encode musical frequencies in the physical dimensions of the stone. And carved into the Lady Chapel, 500 years before Columbus reached the Americas, what appear unmistakably to be ears of maize, a plant that did not exist in Europe when the chapel was built, in a carving detailed enough to identify the species. The excess of symbolism has fascinated researchers for centuries. What lies beneath the floor may matter more than anything carved on the walls above. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2005 by researchers Tim Wallace-Murphy and Mark Oxbrow identified multiple chamber spaces beneath Rosslyn Chapel's main floor. The largest lies beneath the Lady Chapel at the east end. Its approximate dimensions are 4 meters by 4 meters, roughly the area of a large bedroom. Its lining appears to be metallic. The radar signal is deflected in a pattern consistent with lead sheathing applied to the interior walls. No one living has entered it. The Sinclair family, who still own the chapel, has refused every request to excavate. The refusals are not passive neglect. In 2003, the publication of the Da Vinci Code brought worldwide attention to Rosslyn and its Templar associations. The Sinclairs responded by commissioning their own ground-penetrating radar survey. The survey confirmed the existence of the chambers. The Sinclairs declined to excavate. Their stated reason is structural preservation. The active chapel above requires stabilization before the ground beneath can be disturbed. This explanation has been given to every generation of researchers since the 18th century. The family does not claim the vault is empty. They do not deny it exists. They simply decline to open it, in every decade, to every person who asks. The mainstream archaeological view is that the chambers are almost certainly the Sinclair family burial vault. Scottish nobles of the 15th century built crypts beneath their chapels. The lead lining is consistent with the lead coffins in which high-status medieval dead were interred. The secrecy reflects a family's desire for privacy in matters of ancestral remains, not the concealment of historical artifacts. The unusual carvings, the maze, the geometric patterns reflect the eclectic tastes of a wealthy Renaissance patron with exposure to international trade, not encrypted knowledge from a suppressed religious order. But historian John Robinson, in his 1989 study of the Masonic tradition, documented that the Sinclair family held documented custody of multiple properties originally belonging to the Knights Templar in Scotland after the order's dissolution in 1307. The Templar order was destroyed by simultaneous arrest orders across France at dawn on Friday, October 13th of that year. The operation partly succeeded. The Templar fleet moored at La Rochelle, 14 ships, documented in port records dated October 12th, had cleared the harbor by the time the king's agents arrived the following morning. Where those ships went, and what they carried, has not been established in 700 years of subsequent research. Malcolm Barber, in his 1978 definitive study of the order, documented that the English Templars received advance warning through unidentified channels, and that material was transferred out of their English properties before the January 1308 arrests. Researcher Niven Sinclair, a family member, stated in recorded interviews that the Sinclair family oral tradition explicitly identifies the sealed vault as containing objects transferred from the continent in the years following the Templar dissolution. He described, in those interviews, a specific prohibition within family memory against excavation, a prohibition that predates William Sinclair's construction of the chapel by at least one generation, as if the decision about what to do with the contents was made before the building to house them was chosen. In 2011, the Rosslyn Chapel Trust commissioned new structural surveys as part of a restoration project. The results have not been publicly released. The Trust has stated that restoration will continue without disturbing the underground spaces. A 4 by 4 meter lead-lined vault beneath a chapel built by a family with documented Templar custodial connections, sealed for 500 years, confirmed by radar, declined for excavation in every decade it has been asked. The Sinclairs know what is beneath their chapel. They have made a multi-generational decision to keep it there. What specific object or objects required a lead-lined, sealed vault beneath a Christian chapel? Why does the family prohibition against excavation predate the chapel's construction itself? What do the 2011 survey results show that the Rosslyn Chapel Trust has not made public? And what was on those 14 ships when they left La Rochelle on the night the most powerful order in medieval Europe was destroyed? Number 4. The sealed grottos of the Holy Sepulchre. There is a wooden ladder resting on a ledge above the main entrance to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It appears in a detailed engraving of the church facade dated to at least 1728. It has not moved since. Not because no one wants to move it, not because it is load-bearing or structurally significant, but because of a document called the Status Quo, formalized under Ottoman rule in 1757, and honored without interruption by every governing authority that has controlled Jerusalem since the British Mandate, the Jordanian government, the State of Israel. A Greek Orthodox monk placed the ladder on that ledge when the window above it fell under Greek Orthodox jurisdiction. Moving it would require unanimous agreement from all 6 Christian denominations that share the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They have not reached unanimous agreement on anything since 1757. The ladder stays. It is the most precise summary of why the most important archaeological site in Christianity has not been systematically excavated. 6 denominations, the Greek Orthodox, the Roman Catholic, the Armenian Apostolic, the Coptic Orthodox, the Ethiopian Orthodox, and the Syriac Orthodox, each control specific areas of the building under the terms of the status quo. No denomination can conduct maintenance, renovation, or excavation in any part of the church without the consent of all the others. The result is that beneath the tomb of Christ, beneath the rock of Calvary, beneath the most contested 2,000 square meters of ground on earth, there are chambers, grottos, and sealed passages that no modern archaeologist has been permitted to examine. The original church was built by the Emperor Constantine in 335 AD, over a site identified by his mother Helena as Golgotha and the tomb of Christ. Helena's construction required demolishing a Roman temple that the Emperor Hadrian had built over the site in 135 AD, following his deliberate attempt to bury and erase the location after the Jewish revolt. Below Hadrian's temple was a rock quarry. Below the quarry, a garden with rock-cut tombs. Scholars, including Joan Taylor in her 1993 analysis and archaeologist Gideon Avni in separate fieldwork, have documented that the site's first-century burial architecture matches Jewish tomb construction from the Second Temple period. The physical evidence for the site's authenticity is stronger than the skeptics usually acknowledge. But the church was built, destroyed, rebuilt, and modified across 17 centuries of conquest, fire, earthquake, and sectarian dispute. The Persian invasion of 614 damaged it. The Caliph Hakim demolished it in 1009. The Crusaders rebuilt it in 1149. Every subsequent modification sealed the layer beneath more completely. An Israeli Antiquities Authority survey, conducted in the 1970s, identified rock-cut features below the current floor level that had not been documented. Access to investigate further was denied, because no denomination was willing to permit work outside their specific jurisdiction. The mainstream archaeological and ecclesiastical position is that the edicule, the small marble chapel encasing the tomb, does mark the authentic location of Christ's burial, that the identification by Helena and confirmed by Eusebius of Caesarea constitutes a credible chain of testimony, and that the status quo, frustrating as it is, prevents the competing institutional interests from destroying what they cannot agree to share. Excavation is not impossible in principle, it is impossible in practice. That, the custodians say, is unfortunate but adequate, but the sealed areas extend well beyond the edicule. Ethiopian monks have occupied the rooftop of the Chapel of St. Michael since the 17th century, living in modest stone structures above the Coptic section. They have reported underground passages beneath the rooftop compound that connect to deeper levels of the complex. These passages have never been systematically documented by archaeologists. The Armenian section includes a sealed cistern space described in Crusader period sources as a repository for relics transferred from the Temple Mount after the Latin Crusader state's conquest of Jerusalem in 1099. The cistern has not been opened. In 2016, the National Technical University of Athens conducted a restoration of the edicule's exterior cladding, the first time the structure had been opened since 1810. For a period of approximately 60 hours, the marble slab covering the burial shelf inside the tomb was lifted. Beneath it was a layer of fill material. Beneath the fill, ancient limestone. No analysis was conducted on the fill composition. The slab was replaced. The National Geographic team that documented the restoration published photographs. No geophysical survey of the chamber below the burial shelf was undertaken. The holiest site in Christianity contains sealed rooms that no one is allowed to enter, a burial chamber whose contents beneath the slab were examined for 60 hours and left unanalyzed, and a ladder that has been sitting on a window ledge for 300 years because 6 religious organizations cannot reach a consensus about anything. What is in the fill beneath the edicule's burial shelf that was not analyzed in 2016? What do the Ethiopian monks know about the underground passages beneath their rooftop? What was deposited in the Armenian sealed cistern during the Crusader period? And what did Hadrian bury beneath his pagan temple when he was trying to make sure no one ever found this place again? Number 5. The Druid Well of Chartres. Before Chartres Cathedral existed, before the Norman Tower rose above the wheat fields of the Beauce Plain, before the first Gothic arch was cut from limestone, there was a well. It descends 33 meters into the earth beneath what is now the north aisle of the cathedral nave. It is called the Puits de Saints Forts, the Well of the Strong Saints. For at least 2,000 years before Christ, the Carnutes, a Gaulish tribe whose territory covered what is now central France, considered the hill at Chartres, the Omphalos of Gaul, the sacred center, the navel of the world, the point from which the religious geography of an entire civilization radiated outward. Julius Caesar, writing in the Gallic Wars in the 1st century BCE, described the annual gathering of Druid priests from across all of Gaul at a site in Carnute territory. Most classical scholars identify that site as Chartres. The Druids worshipped water sources. They lowered sacred objects into wells. What went into the well beneath Chartres Cathedral has not been fully retrieved. The cathedral standing today is the 7th structure on this site. The previous 6 were destroyed by Viking raids or fire. The current Gothic building dates from 1194 to approximately 1220, constructed after the 6th cathedral burned. Its builders placed the new nave directly over the sacred well and incorporated beneath it 2 Carolingian crypts from the 9th century and an older Merovingian crypt from the 6th century. Beneath those, partially excavated by archaeologist René Merlet at the turn of the 20th century, are evidence of Roman occupation and pre-Roman ritual use of the spring that feeds the well. The well itself was documented by 19th century cathedral canon Yves de la Porte, who recorded that dredging operations in the 1850s retrieved votive objects consistent with Gaulish ritual deposition. The practice of lowering sacred items into water sources as offerings to the spirits believed to inhabit them. Jean Markel, surveying the site in the early 20th century, catalogued additional objects recovered during 17th century maintenance of the well, including carved stone figurines of the type associated with Carnute healing sanctuaries. The 33-meter depth of the well puts its floor at or below the level of the Roman-era structures. What remains at those depths has not been investigated using modern archaeological methods. The subterranean chambers beneath the current cathedral extend significantly beyond the well. The Romanesque crypt, the largest in France, is partially open to visitors. Beyond the accessible portions, sealed behind locked doors, last formally documented by cathedral authorities in the 1970s, are passages connecting the Carolingian foundation levels to the earlier Merovingian layer. The Catholic Diocese of Chartres has not permitted independent archaeological survey of these passages since the mid-20th century. The mainstream explanation is uncontroversial. Pope Gregory I explicitly instructed Augustine of Canterbury in 601 AD to adapt pagan sacred places for Christian use rather than destroy them. Chartres is a textbook example of this policy, the deliberate consecration of a pre-existing holy site to give the new religion the advantage of the old one's sacredness. The well was incorporated as a ritual feature. The sealed passages are sealed for structural reasons. Medieval foundations require careful management, and the cathedral's active liturgical function requires stability above ground. What this explanation does not address is what happened to the contents. In 1963, Canon Henri Bouvet attempted to document the subterranean passages and reported that niches had been carved into the passage walls at regular intervals, each niche clearly designed to hold an object of consistent size. The niches were empty. Traces of organic material residue consistent with carved wood or bone were present in several niches, but the objects themselves were gone. Someone had entered the passages, removed what was stored there, and left the spaces cleared. The absence of contents in chambers purpose-built to contain them is a specific kind of evidence. It means someone made a decision. Architectural historian John James, who spent 15 years studying the building and published his findings in 1982, argued that the medieval master builders who constructed the cathedral were working within a tradition that deliberately encoded the pre-Christian sacred geometry of the Druidic site into the building's proportions. The ratios of nave height to aisle width, the distances between specific pillars, correspond to measurements found in no other Gothic cathedral in Europe. They appear to derive from the site's pre-Christian astronomical geometry, the alignment of the sacred spring to celestial cycles that the Carnute Druids tracked across generations. 4 civilizations built on this ground because it was already sacred before any of them arrived. 7 buildings were raised over the same well. Someone cleared the niches in the passages beneath them. And the well descends 33 meters into the earth, and no one with modern equipment has been to the bottom. What was removed from the niches in the sealed passages, and by whose authority? What objects remain in the unretrieved depths of the Well of the Strong Saints? Why does the cathedral's structural geometry encode proportions that match pre-Christian Druidic astronomical alignments found in no other Gothic building? And who decided that what lay in the passages beneath the most sacred Marian shrine in medieval France should be locked away? Number 6. The tunnels of Lalibela. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, at an altitude of 2,600 meters, where the air is thin and the basalt plateau is ancient and hard, 11 churches have been carved from solid rock, not built. Carved. Each one was excavated downward from the surface of the plateau, the stone cut away around it, until the church stood free, a monolith still attached to the bedrock at its base, surrounded on all sides by vertical trenches cut by human hands. The carving then continued inward, hollowing out the interior, cutting columns, arches, windows, and sanctuaries from what had been solid volcanic stone. The largest, the Church of Bede Medhane Alem, measures 33 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 11 meters tall. It contains 72 pillars. Every cubic centimeter of it was once part of a basalt plateau. According to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, King Lalibela ordered the construction in the 12th century. According to the same tradition, the work proceeded so quickly because angels joined the human laborers each night and continued building until dawn. The 11 churches are connected by tunnels. Some of these tunnels are open. They are narrow passages cut through the rock at irregular heights, linking the church compounds across the trench systems that surround each structure. Pilgrims move through them in near total darkness, guided by priests carrying tapered candles. But the tunnel system does not end at the 11 documented churches. When Italian archaeologist Nesbitt surveyed the site in 1914, he identified branches in the tunnel network that extended beyond the main routes into the basalt plateau without connecting to any known surface structure. Some of these branches were sealed. He did not trace them to their end. According to accounts recorded by anthropologist David Buxton in 1949, the priests describe what lies at the end of at least one of these sealed passages. They call it the Tomb of Adam. The designation places it within the Ethiopian Orthodox theological framework in which Lalibela was constructed as a second Jerusalem, a deliberate replication of the sacred landscape of the Holy Land, stone for stone. The Church of Beit Golgotha, which sits at the center of the complex, contains what the priests identify as the actual tomb of King Lalibela. The inner sanctuary of Beit Golgotha is permanently closed to all women and to all non-Orthodox Christian visitors. Beyond the main sanctuary, behind a door that no outside researcher has reportedly been permitted to pass through in living memory, is the sealed chamber. Graham Hancock investigated the site in the early 1990s, examining Lalibela's connection to the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition of Ark of the Covenant guardianship. He was denied access to the restricted areas categorically, with no stated reason beyond clerical authority. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's claim to custody of the Ark is not a fringe belief. It is a foundational element of Ethiopian national and religious identity documented continuously since at least the 4th century AD, when the Aksumite kingdom adopted Christianity under King Ezana. The tradition holds that Menelik I, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Ethiopia in the 10th century BCE. The primary claimed location is the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, where a single appointed guardian, the Nibura it holds the position for life, cannot leave the church compound and cannot be replaced until he dies. No outside person is permitted within the inner sanctuary. The mainstream scholarly position is that the restricted areas most likely contain royal tombs and ritual spaces appropriate to an Orthodox clerical tradition that requires exclusivity for its innermost sancta. The Ark claim, while central to Ethiopian identity, is considered unverifiable by archaeologists who have not been allowed to investigate. Lalibela's engineering represents extraordinary medieval craftsmanship, remarkable but explicable within the resources of the Zagwe dynasty. The restriction on access is not concealment but sacred practice. What this position does not address is the radiocarbon evidence. David Phillipson of Cambridge University published findings in 2008 based on the dating of a wooden structural element within the Beit Medain Alem. The date suggested that construction at the site may predate the 12th century reign attributed to King Lalibela by several hundred years. The tool mark patterns cut into the tunnel walls are consistent across all 11 churches, indicating unified planning rather than accumulated construction over generations. A tunnel system built to a single unified plan, predating the king credited with building it, extending into sealed sections of the basalt plateau that connect to no documented surface structure. If the tunnels were not built by Lalibela, who built them? What is in the sealed chamber beyond the Beit Golgotha sanctuary that no outside researcher has been allowed to enter? Why does the tunnel network continue past the 11 churches into sections of the plateau where the rock above shows no indication of what lies beneath? Number 7. The Vaults of St. Michan. The Church of St. Michan stands on the north bank of the River Liffey in Dublin, in a neighborhood of narrow streets built on ground that has been continuously inhabited since Norse settlers established a fishing community here around the 10th century. The building most visitors see dates to 1686. The tower above the entrance is older built, according to tradition, by Hiberno-Norse monks around 1095, on foundations that may go back further still. Beneath the church, extending under the graveyard and into the surrounding ground, are limestone catacombs. The bodies interred in them do not decay. The chemical properties of the local substrata methane, produced by the decomposition of organic matter in the ancient bogland beneath this district, combined with calcium carbonate in the limestone that draws moisture from buried tissue, create conditions that mummify the dead in place. Some of the bodies in the accessible vaults have been there for 300 years. Some have been there for 800. Their skin has turned brown and tight as cured leather. Their joints remain articulated. Their fingernails are present and intact. The accessible vaults of St. Michan's contain 4 main chambers. The Crusader Vault holds a man who died around 1200 AD, lying in an open coffin with one arm extended past the broken lid. He died on crusade or in its military context, and his physical presence beneath a 17th-century Dublin church is a collision of 7 centuries that no exhibit case could replicate. For 2 centuries, visitors to the vault were permitted to shake his extended hand, a tradition sustained by the belief that contact with a preserved crusader brought good luck. A vandal broke into the vault in 2019 and destroyed the hand. The Church of Ireland restricted public access to the vaults significantly in the aftermath. The 3 other accessible chambers hold a nun, the brothers Henry and John Shears, who were executed as leaders of the 1798 United Irishman Rebellion, and an unidentified man whose lower legs were removed to accommodate the available coffin length. These are the chambers the guidebooks describe. In 2003, the Dublin Civic Trust conducted a structural survey of the church and its surroundings. The survey identified at least 6 additional sealed vault sections beneath the building and adjacent properties. These were not opened. The stated reasons were air quality concerns and partial structural collapse in some areas. As of the most recent documented inquiry in 2022, no formal re-entry has been authorized. Irish burial law requires a legal determination of the status of any human remains before sealed burial spaces can be entered. That determination has not been sought. The mainstream explanation for the preservation is straightforward chemistry. The methane and dry air in the limestone vaults are hostile to the bacteria that drive decomposition. The sealed chambers maintain stable temperature and humidity year-round, eliminating the freeze-thaw cycling that accelerates decay in exposed environments. The mummification is geological accident, not design. The sealed sections are closed for concrete structural and legal reasons, bad air and good law, not institutional secrecy. But the ground beneath St. Michan's church is older than any Christian building that has stood on it. The Norse founders of this settlement in the 10th century practiced a religion that combined Scandinavian pagan tradition with Gaelic Irish custom. The pre-Norman site on this ground was not Christian in any straightforward sense. Antiquarian John Dalton, compiling his 1838 history of Dublin from earlier archival sources, recorded that grave-digging operations in the 18th century uncovered carved stone objects in the lower strata of the St. Michan's graveyard. Objects that did not correspond to any known Christian iconographic tradition, and that could not be matched to documented early medieval Irish forms. They were discarded or lost. No subsequent excavation has been conducted at the depth where they were found. The Viking and pre-Viking occupation layer beneath the current church has never been formally investigated. What the Norse builders placed in the earth on this ground, and whether any of it survives in the sealed vault sections below the current floor, is a question the chemistry of Dublin limestone may have preserved in better condition than anyone realizes. The same methane that keeps an 800-year-old crusader presentable does not discriminate between a crusader and whatever was put in the ground before him. The legal pathway to answer the question exists. The archaeological mandate for investigation exists, given Dalton's documented evidence of pre-Christian material culture in the lower strata. The sealed vaults have been known to contain human remains since 2003. In over 20 years, no legal determination has been sought that would allow entry. What Norse or pre-Christian objects are preserved in the lower strata of the St. Michan's graveyard beyond what the 18th century gravediggers discarded? What is in the 6 sealed vault sections identified in 2003? And why has no one, in over 2 decades, taken the legal step required to find out? Number 8. The Church, the Earth Swallowed. In 847 AD, an earthquake shook Rome and dislodged a section of the Palatine Hill. The resulting collapse of earth and masonry buried a portion of the Roman Forum under meters of debris. Among the structures sealed beneath it was a church. It had been built inside the vestibule of the Domitianic Palace, one of the most architecturally significant rooms in the Roman Empire, the formal threshold through which every visitor passed before being received by the emperor himself sometime around 550 AD, making it one of the oldest Christian church buildings within the city of Rome. The earthquake sealed the entrance. The debris accumulated. Medieval Rome built over the rubble field. By the 10th century, the church's location was unknown. By the 15th, it had been completely forgotten. It sat beneath the Forum for over 1,000 years, its frescoes still vivid, its liturgical furniture still in place, its interior as intact as the afternoon when the ceiling shook and everyone ran. An entire church, roughly the floor area of a large house, preserved in a refrigerator of collapsed earth beneath the most visited archaeological site in the world. Workers excavating for the Italian government in 1900 broke through the debris layer and entered the interior. What they found was frescoes covering every available surface, paintings applied in multiple layers, spanning 5 centuries of continuous artistic production from the 6th century to the 9th. The images ranged across the full vocabulary of early Christian iconography: saints, martyrs, narrative scenes from Scripture, formal portraits of the Virgin and Child. The earliest stratum of painting, dating to approximately 550 AD, showed direct influence from Byzantine imperial court painting, technically accomplished, psychologically present, rendered with a realism unusual for its period. Among the images in that earliest layer was a formal portrait of the Virgin Mary, enthroned, with the infant Christ. Art historians who subsequently studied the work identified it as the oldest surviving painted portrait of the Virgin in the history of Christian art. It survived an earthquake, a collapse, and 1,050 years of burial in conditions that destroyed more carefully curated works throughout the same period. The fresco is in near-perfect condition. The 1,000 years of burial were, for this painting, the best conservation treatment it could have received. Art historians Maria Andaloro and Giulia Bordi conducted a comprehensive resurvey of the site beginning in 2013, funded by the Capitoline Museum and the German Archaeological Institute, published in 2016. Their work documented chamber spaces beneath and adjacent to the main nave that had not been investigated in the 1900 excavation. These included a lower cistern room of Roman construction, incorporated into the church building's foundation, and a passageway leading west into the Palatine hillside, blocked by debris at a point where the 1900 excavators had noted it, without pursuing it. Ground-penetrating radar, conducted in 2015, indicated that the western passage extends at least 2 additional meters below the current cleared level before reaching what the radar signal characterized as a sealed, enclosed space. The composition of that space, what is in it, what it was built for the radar, could not determine through the debris fill above it. The church opened to visitors in 2016 in a restricted configuration. The subterranean areas beneath the nave floor are not accessible. The western passage remains blocked. The cistern space beneath the apse is visible through a grate, but has not been excavated to its full depth. The Diocese of Rome has stated that the delicate condition of the ancient frescoes makes atmospheric stability the primary conservation concern, and that excavation in the connected underground spaces would introduce humidity variation capable of causing irreversible damage. This is a legitimate preservation concern. But the building that became Santa Maria Antiqua was not chosen randomly from among Rome's many available spaces. The vestibule of the Domitianic Palace was the most deliberately symbolic room in the imperial complex, the threshold of power, designed to communicate the weight of the empire before anyone reached the emperor himself. Whatever ritual or administrative function this room served before the 6th century Christians converted it, whatever objects occupied its niches, whatever the palace's underground infrastructure contained at depth, has not been investigated. The Roman cistern network beneath the Palatine Hill connects to a system of underground chambers that extends well beyond the footprint of any single building. 1,000 years of burial preserved what 17 centuries of continuous occupation would have destroyed. The earthquake of 847 was the best archaeologist this church ever had. Whatever else it sealed in the western passage, in the cistern below the apse, in the sealed space, the 2015 radar detected has been waiting just as patiently as the oldest painting of the Virgin. What is in the sealed space at the end of the western passage that the 2015 ground-penetrating radar identified but could not characterize? What lies in the unexcavated depths of the cistern beneath the apse? And what was the Domitianic Palace vestibule used for in the centuries between the fall of the Western Empire and the day someone decided to make it a church? Number 9. The Templar Crypt. In 1119, 9 French knights presented themselves to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and requested permission to establish an order of warrior monks, whose stated purpose was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling the roads to the Holy City. Baldwin granted them quarters in the royal palace, which was built over the southern section of the Temple Mount, the site of Solomon's Temple, and, at that time, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The official record of the next 9 years shows 9 knights guarding roads. William of Tyre, a medieval historian writing 50 years later with access to sources no longer available, expressed skepticism about this account. He noted that the knights spent a significant portion of those 9 years conducting what he described as private excavations in the vaults beneath the Temple Mount, in the area they occupied. He could not determine what they were looking for. He could not determine what they found. Within 2 generations, the Knights Templar became the wealthiest and most powerful military organization in medieval Europe. They invented international banking, maintaining credit networks that allowed a knight to deposit funds in Paris and withdraw them in Jerusalem without carrying currency. They controlled more than 9,000 manors and estates across Europe. At their height, their financial assets exceeded those of most European monarchies. None of this wealth can be traced to any visible source before their time on the Temple Mount. No inheritance, no patronage, no commercial enterprise explains the transformation of 9 knights who arrived with nothing into an institution that kings borrowed money from. The Temple Church in London was built by the Templars and consecrated in 1185 by the Patriarch of Jerusalem himself, Heraclius of Caesarea, a ceremony of such significance that the Patriarch made the journey from Jerusalem specifically to perform it. It was modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a circular nave corresponding to the rotunda that encloses Christ's tomb, with a rectangular chancel extending east. 9 marble effigies of Templar knights lie on the floor of the round nave, the finest 13th century English military sculpture in existence. Beneath the chancel, restoration records from 1842 document a sealed crypt. The architects who opened it noted that the fill material inside the chambers did not appear to be structural debris or sediment. It appeared, in their documented description, to have been deliberately introduced as if the space had been packed. Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France coordinated the destruction of the Templar Order in 1307. The arrest orders were prepared in secret and dispatched for simultaneous execution across France at dawn on Friday, October 13th. The operation required extraordinary secrecy because the Templars were armed, organized, and well-informed. The secrecy partially failed. Malcolm Barber, in his 1978 definitive study of the order, documented that the English Templars received advance warning through channels that remain unidentified. Material was transferred out of the Temple Church before the English arrests in January 1308. The Templar fleet moored at La Rochelle documented in port records dated October 12th, the day before the French arrests had cleared the harbor by the time the king's agents arrived. 14 Templar ships carrying cargo of undetermined nature sailed out of La Rochelle and were never officially accounted for. The mainstream historical position is that the sealed crypt beneath the Temple Church chancel contains nothing of historical significance, that the deliberately packed fill, noted in 1842, reflects post-medieval, secondary use of the space, and that the order's apparent wealth and power are explainable through documented patronage, land grants, and the accumulated profit of international banking operations over 2 centuries. The Temple Church is administered by the Inner Temple and Middle Temple, 2 Inns of Court that have managed the building since the Templars' dissolution. They declined a formal excavation request from the British Museum's Medieval Department in 2010. Structural integrity of the 13th century effigies above, they stated, required that the ground beneath remain undisturbed. But a church whose consecration required the personal presence of Jerusalem's patriarch was not merely a regional headquarters. It was the most important Templar property in England, chosen precisely because it would be the repository for the order's most significant English assets. The 9 knights who spent 9 years excavating the vaults beneath the Temple Mount brought something back. Every medieval account of the order's rapid rise to power is consistent with a single variable: access to something that no other institution possessed. What was packed into the crypt at Temple Church by the men who knew the English arrests were coming was packed there by people who understood exactly what they were sealing and why it needed to be sealed. The fill has been in place since January 1308. The Inner Temple has not permitted excavation since 1842. The 14 ships from La Rochelle have not been found. What was transferred out of the Temple Church in the days before the English Templar arrests? What is in the deliberately packed chambers beneath the chancel that no excavation has reached since 1842? And what exactly did 9 knights find beneath the Temple Mount that made them the most powerful organization in medieval Europe within a single generation? Number 10. The Three-Religion Crypt of Cordoba. In Cordoba, Spain, there is a building that has been, in sequence, a Roman temple, a Visigothic cathedral, a mosque, and a Catholic cathedral. The current structure is called the Mezquita Catedral, the Mosque Cathedral, a name that acknowledges what no single religious label could contain. Abd al-Rahman, one began construction of the mosque in 784 AD, on the site of the Visigothic Church of St. Vincent, acquiring the Christian half of a building the two communities had been sharing before demolishing it and beginning construction of what would become one of the greatest architectural achievements of the medieval world. The Visigothic church had itself been built on the foundations of a Roman temple dedicated to Janus, the god of transitions, of doorways, of things that face two ways at once. Beneath the Roman temple, archaeological surveys have identified evidence of pre-Roman Iberian ritual occupation extending back centuries before the legions arrived. For at least 2,000 years before the first mosque arch was laid, this specific point in the center of Cordoba was considered sacred by every civilization that passed through. None of them asked why. King Ferdinand III of Castile reconquered Cordoba in 1236 and converted the mosque to a cathedral without demolishing the Islamic structure, a decision that produced one of the most extraordinary buildings in Europe, where Gothic columns rise between Moorish arches in a space that refuses to resolve into any single tradition. In 1523, with the approval of King Charles I, the cathedral chapter inserted a full Gothic nave directly through the center of the mosque's prayer hall. Charles came to inspect the result. He reportedly said, "You have destroyed something unique in the world and replaced it with something ordinary." He was not wrong. But what he did not say, what no one appears to have asked across 17 centuries of construction, is what lies beneath all of it. In 2004, architect Carlos Luca de Tena and historian Rafael Frochoso conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the Mezquita's subterranean infrastructure and presented their findings to the Junta de Andalucia. The findings were not fully published in the peer-reviewed archaeological literature. What the survey identified were chamber spaces beneath the current floor level, extending beyond the documented footprint of the Roman temple spaces the Roman builders did not construct, oriented differently from the Roman structure above them. At the depth they occupy, they correspond to a pre-Roman stratigraphic layer. More specifically, these chambers are aligned to an astronomical bearing corresponding to the winter solstice sunrise. That solar alignment is characteristic of pre-Celtic megalithic architecture on the Iberian Peninsula. It is almost never found in urban contexts. It means someone was here, building with astronomical intention, before the Romans, before the Visigoths, before the Umayyads, before the cathedral chapter, before anyone whose name appears in the written record of this city. The Catholic Diocese of Cordoba, which maintains administrative control of the building, has declined to allow excavation. The Junta de Andalucia, which has jurisdiction over archaeological heritage, has not pressed the matter. In 2013, the Archaeology Department of the University of Cordoba submitted a formal proposal for a new non-invasive survey using improved radar technology. The diocese declined. The stated reasons were the building's active religious use and its UNESCO World Heritage Site status. Disturbing the floor, even for a non-invasive survey, was deemed inconsistent with preservation obligations. 4 civilizations placed their most sacred structures over this specific point, each built directly over the previous, incorporating its predecessor's foundations without investigating what those foundations rested on. The Romans built over the Iberian site. The Visigoths built over the Roman temple. The Umayyads built over the Visigothic church. The Catholics built through the Umayyad mosque. At each transition, the new religion claimed the site's existing sacredness and sealed the evidence of the religion it replaced. The cumulative effect of 4 layers of deliberate construction now protects chambers below them that no modern instrument has fully resolved. This is the pattern that connects all 10 rooms in this video. The Mithraeum of San Clemente, flooded and buried beneath the church, raised directly over it. The pagan necropolis beneath St. Peter's, sealed by 17 centuries of Catholic institutional management. The lead-lined vault at Rosslyn, locked by a family that will not say what it holds. The Holy Sepulchre, frozen in jurisdictional amber since 1757, the cleared niches in the passages beneath Chartres. The sealed tunnels of Lalibela extending past the 11 documented churches into basalt that no outsider has entered. The Norse foundation layer beneath St. Michan's, below the mummies, unreached. Santa Maria Antiqua, sealed for 1,000 years by an earthquake that preserved what occupation would have destroyed. The deliberately packed crypt beneath the temple church, untouched since 1842, and beneath Cordoba, pre-Roman chambers aligned to a sunrise that no one built by accident. Each was sealed by someone who made a decision. The ground-penetrating radar keeps returning the same answer. We have not looked far enough. We have not dug deep enough. The most important things we have buried are the ones we do not yet know are there. Subscribe. Tell someone who needs to see this. And in the comments, which of these 10 rooms would you open first?